I find in my life, the most satisfying and the best feeling that I have is when I put myself in situations where I'm scared to be there. And that can be from deciding I'm going to throw my own art show in a park and not ask anyone if I can do it, just making it happen and doing it, to deciding to pack up your house and move away, not knowing what you're doing. Just believe in the process and just do the thing.
The Urban Exodus podcast shares the wisdom, wit, and stories of those who decided to embark on the road less traveled to pursue their own interpretation of the good life. Small business owners, change makers, artists, farmers, and more, working towards building a better future for themselves and their fellow citizens. The people I've met through this project give me energy and hope for a better future. May their inspirational words and practical advice embolden and guide you on your own journey. This podcast is for country dreamers, rural folk, and urban dwellers alike who want to feel more connected to the natural world and the purpose and choices in their lives. I'm Melissa Hessler. Welcome to the Urban Exodus. Urban Exodus is a labor of love and is only made possible by listener support. To support our programming, please consider making a listener contribution or joining our Patreon community for access to bonus features, rapid-fire interviews, videos, and so much more. I'm excited to invite you to my conversation with Cory Murchy. Cory is a professional musician and fine artist who spent nearly 2 decades playing bass for the Seattle-based indie rock band Minus the Bear. Cory reached a level that most musicians only dream of, being able to support himself entirely off of music. He toured all around the world, playing sold-out venues from New York to Japan. In 2018, the band played its last show, and he had the opportunity for a major life change. Cory and his wife Annie decided to throw caution to the wind. They sold their house in Seattle, packed up their cars and their dogs, and took a house-sitting job on an 800-acre ranch in rural Colorado. It was an enormous change, but they fully embraced the hard work and the steep learning curve. This is where Cory developed a deep-seated passion for water movement, farming, and irrigation. Following the ranch, they planted permanent roots in a little village nestled along the Rio Grande in the high desert of New Mexico. Cory had dabbled with painting when he was working as a professional musician, but he didn't have enough energy or time to fully commit to the process. And once he left the city, he finally started to focus on his art. In our conversation, we speak about the power of taking risks, believing in the process, and picking yourself up when you fail. This is a story about finding your voice through individual expression. The freedom to shift your path without fear, reconnection to self through change, and embracing new chapters in life fully. All right. Well, I am absolutely thrilled to have on the show my long lost friend, Cory Murchy. And Cory is a musician and an artist. And for nearly 2 decades, you played in the indie rock band Minus the Bear. And we knew one another because I dated one of your bandmates. And so we got to go on tour together. And I just have always really loved you and thought you were such an amazing spirit. And I saw from afar that you made the transition after your band parted ways to living in a rural area and have really just thrived, you and your partner. So I'm really excited to have you on the show to share your story. And first off, I would love if you just share a little bit of your personal backstory, where you started out and how you got to where you are now.
Yeah. Well, first off, it's great to be reconnected and see you and see what you're doing as well. So thank you. The feeling is mutual. So yeah, where to begin? So yeah, I guess we'll just start from the beginning. I was born up in Washington, lived between Alki or West Seattle and Aberdeen. which is where my parents were from for the first few years of my life. My father was a musician and toured as I was a young child. Funny enough, some of my first memories were, out on the road with him. If, my mom would bring us out to go see some shows when he was out on tour and stuff. So in a weird way, I sort of grew up on the road in a roundabout way. We lived in Seattle until I was about 5, 6. And then we moved down to Los Angeles so that my dad could pursue a musical career. But the realities of raising a family definitely set in, and he didn't really end up touring and taking the path of a musician like he had intended to. Always played, but was more focused on raising a family and providing as well as my mom. So we lived in Los Angeles until I was about 12, 13. And then that's when we moved to Santa Fe, New Mexico. My parents were just kind of done with LA life, and they knew that they didn't want to go back to Seattle, but had recently visited this far off Western town called Santa Fe and fell in love with it, like so many of us do, because it was completely different than anything that they had experienced ultimately. And I think it just really resonated with them. So we moved to Santa Fe. That's where I really consider I grew up and kind of started formulating who I was as a human. And really thankful that we ended up moving to Santa Fe for that reason. Started playing music. Growing up, I never wanted to play music. My parents had us, my sister and I, enrolled in piano lessons just because they felt it was an important, just tool to have. But I always fought it. I was like, I'm never going to be a musician. I don't want to do any of that. I want to join the Navy and become a fighter pilot, thank you, Top Gun. I was going to go fight, in fighter jets. But when you're a teenager, things change. And I found Nirvana and The Cure, and my life kind of changed in that, I found this music that spoke to me and kind of made me think, wait, you could do that. These guys did that. These guys are from Aberdeen. You're from Aberdeen. So Nirvana, really kind of got in my head and changed my life as far as a trajectory, I think. Got involved with music, playing bass in Santa Fe, started a bunch of bands and just kind of did it, because I fell in love with it, decided that it was something that I wanted to pursue after high school, needed to figure out what I was going to do. I couldn't stay in Santa Fe because it's a pretty small town. I knew that if I wanted to play music professionally and do what I thought I wanted to do, I'd need to branch out, which led me back to Seattle for some reason. It wasn't that I really knew anyone in Seattle, but it was familiar. It wasn't LA, which was the other music town.
Nirvana was from there.
Nirvana was there from there. So yeah, ended up moving up to Seattle in the end of 1999, and didn't really have a plan, but I kind of gave myself 2 years to figure it out. I was like, all right, if I give myself 2 years and at the end of that 2 years, nothing is happening, then I'll reevaluate. Maybe I'll go to school or pursue something. Hopefully I'll figured something out. Needless to say, the 2 years came and it worked out. I found people. The first year and a half was really tough. As you might remember, Seattle is a tough place to meet people and to connect. For me, at least it was.
They call it the Seattle freeze.
For a reason. Yeah. Yeah. And the only one that doesn't believe that are people from Seattle.
Yeah, it's
all
true.
that grew up there. They're like, what are you talking about? Okay. So I did end up meeting people and starting a band, and it became Minus the Bear. We ended up touring and recording and playing music for the better part of 20 years. And then, that came to an end. It was definitely time for all of us to pursue other things. I knew, and my wife, Annie, always knew that eventually we wanted to go back to New Mexico. She wasn't from there, but she'd been going with me on visits and fell in love with the land as well. And we knew at some point we wanted to end up in New Mexico. And when the band came to a close, it was like, here's the time. This is the jump off point. We packed up our house, put everything into a pod, sent it down to Albuquerque, didn't know what we were going to do, but we knew we were leaving. And it was like, let's just do it. So we put our house on the market, packed up everything, headed south. Ultimately, didn't have a place to move to in Santa Fe. We were still looking. We ended up on top of a mesa on the western slope of Colorado at a property that one of my best friends, his family inherited from his wife's father. And they were in the process of trying to sell it. But it was a 750 acre spread of land with a house on it. And he basically was like, hey, I know you guys don't have a place to go, or, you're not knowing really where you're landing, but there's this spot. You can go up and squat on it for as long as you want, until we sell it. We kind of thought, that sounds just crazy enough. Let's do it. So we, loaded up our Subaru with a little pack on top with 2 dogs and drove down to Colorado and ended up on top of this mesa. And that's kind of where I feel the next chapter began. It really opened our eyes to the fact that we can do this. We can live outside of our comfort level and what we're used to. And that was when we left Seattle. We definitely wanted to change. We wanted to change our lives. We didn't want to just move from one city to another city, but we didn't know what that looked like. We didn't know how that was going to play out. We had no idea. And frankly, we weren't ready until we just were forced to actually make the change.
I would imagine that there were so many skills that you found that you had kind of needed to relearn or learn for the first time. And being able to do that on not your land is kind of great too.
Big time. I mean, 4 or 5 days after we landed there, I found myself 20 feet down a cistern trying to fix a water line that was busted. It was terrifying. But the whole thing was terrifying in that, we just had to figure it out. But it was also very liberating in that, we didn't have someone to hold our hands. We just had to figure it out. I relearned my way around a chainsaw real quick, and we learned how to navigate rural roads and just rural life and how to plan ahead for a week or two without going to town or, popping into the local whatever. So yeah, we learned a lot, and it was fast and furious, but it felt so good. It felt so natural, and it felt like this is what we had been seeking the whole time. Being able to wake up and look out on the pasture and see it full of elk feeding on the land, as we sip our coffee, was like, oh, this is why we're here and we're not in Seattle battling traffic. It's like worth trying to figure out all this stuff.
Observing you guys as a band and kind of having that kind of intimate window into it, a band is a business. It really is. And there's, the marketing and there's so many interconnected pieces. And nowadays, a lot of bands are really responsible for taking on a lot of that themselves. Mm-hmm. And so as someone who had a 20-year career as a professional touring musician, I wonder if you have any advice for emerging artists on ways to fine-tune their business or get their work noticed or reach a wider audience.
I think you have to make the decision of why you're doing what you're doing and what it is that you're trying to accomplish. Do you want to be a musician so that you can make a living and so that you can have a career of it and put the work in? And that means touring and going to radio stations at 6 a.m. after you've been up all night. And it's work. Playing music and being in a band is work. And I guess if you decide you're ready for the work, all right, let's go. You can also go, well, I just want to play music and enjoy this and do it for myself. And that's totally great too. But it's also just do it for yourself then. Music can be your passion, but you can still work and do other things in order to make a living.
People see it as this very glamorous, amazing thing, but it is hard.
And you have to be willing to sacrifice. I mean, because it is a sacrifice. You're sacrificing 23 hours of the day in order to spend an hour on stage, ultimately. And that 23 hours a day can involve all sorts of things. a lot of it is sitting around and waiting, but it's all work.
You started kind of at the birth of social media. And I feel like you guys utilize social media in a really smart way that helped build your audience. So maybe any tips in that regard as well?
Yeah, absolutely. Social media definitely did help. And we came at this time to where, bands had built careers on just touring and just by word of mouth. And we kind of you're right, we came up at a time where that work ethic was something that was instilled with us. But then with the social media aspect, we were able to really, for lack of a better word, capitalize on spreading the word that way so that people knew who we were before we got to town, which is a big deal. And it was a special moment in time, I think. And there's so much that you can do through social media. And that's how so many bands are being able to promote themselves via social media. But it also opens up the floodgates, and there's a glut of bands that you now weed through. And there's so many, micro divisions of genres and et cetera, et cetera. But there's more people listening to music. And, you just have to really put the work in. And a lot of that is touring and, getting out and being exposed. Someone will hear your name through social media, but then what really clicked for us as a band was to be able to actually see us live. And that, I feel like, was the moment where people were able to click and like, oh, all right, this is great. This is awesome.
Yeah.
And we were able to kind of prove ourselves on the stage.
Through performance.
But it takes going out and doing it and hitting the same towns 2 or 3 times a year. And it's grueling. And sometimes you're going to play to 3 people in Rochester at the Bug Jar. And it sucks, because one of the people is the bartender. But that's part of it. It's just work. It's work. Nothing comes easy, and don't feel like you deserve or you're owed it, you know? Like no one owes you an audience. Like you have to earn that. Sometimes it just doesn't work out. Like I know plenty of great bands that, could get so much traction and then just don't really push through. But they're also the bands that just keep touring, and they have like this solid core of fans that will follow them and support them. And that's enough,
Yeah.
So it really has to be a passion, and understand that passion takes a lot of work in order to keep it moving and afloat.
So I'd love for you to get any thoughts on the current music industry and anything that you think needs to change within the existing system to make it better for artists and employees.
The record industry is constantly changing. Like it's constantly evolving. It's constantly doing different things, and it's constantly changing their practices, full stop. It's been that way since the 20s, when they first started putting out 78s on vinyl. Through the 50s and 60s and 70s were this like kind of magical period where all of a sudden bands were given huge lump sums. Like there's these rock stars and they were, bands were getting huge advances, and that worked for a time, but then the music industry changed. So as we entered the industry, with the rise of social media, the big contracts started falling out, and, the money wasn't there in these big, crazy contracts. But it was like it's like a housing bubble, right? Like it wasn't sustainable, and it never was. And so it's bound to explode after the 80s, let's say, or the 90s, or whenever it was. I always looked at music as the results, and the way you were successful is by touring and being on the road and being in front of people. For me, it was never about album sales. Personally, I didn't care about that. It was about being able to show up to a venue and have it packed or not. And that was where I felt that was the work, and that was what you get paid for. Of course, there were other bands and peers of ours that would get lucrative contracts and it would be cool, but they also only lasted for 2 or 3 years for whatever reason.
They set expectations on sales. And if you don't meet those expectations, then like your whole PR team falls out from underneath you. They drop you. Yeah.
And you don't build longevity. You don't build a relationship with the fans that will come back to every show. There's a reason why, the Rolling Stones and Bob Dylan and Smokey Robinson and all these guys are still touring, because that's where the money is ultimately. That's what keeps them in our vernacular at this point. For me, music is great to listen to on record, and it's very important, but the live experience and actual seeing it and feeling it that's where the meat and the heart and the soul of music is, and the connection to people. You just have to go out and get out there constantly.
If performance is the part of music that you absolutely love, it makes sense that that's such a key component. As somebody that had traveled the world for 20 years as a traveling musician, I wondered what your experience was like.
It's a weird way to see the world, admittedly. It can be, depending on how you're traveling. For the first 10 years or so, we were in a van and a trailer, that we drove ourselves. So that's one way of seeing the country. And then when we shifted into a bus, like a full-on bus where we had a driver, that was a totally different way to see the country. And both are great. Both had merits. I think being able to just walk out of the van or the bus and explore and just walk the town or city, wherever you were, and just try to, for me, I would try to cover as much ground as I could to just explore and go to museums, or, I started bringing a bike along, and so I could really just stretch out, eat different foods, and just the connection to the towns and the places that we were in was always important to me. The last thing I wanted to do was just sit in the back of the venue when we got there. I think some of the best parts was just being able to, go to Japan, go to Colombia, go to Brazil, go to Europe, see this country. So many of us, of our peers, like, they've maybe traveled out of state. They've maybe, done a couple. And I think people are doing it more, but like, we got to see the entire country, multiple times. Twice a year, at least, for about 15 years of those. We would crisscross twice a year, at least. So that, I think, really, for me, was the best part. It's also the hardest part. And it sucks when you wake up and, let's be frank, you wake up on the bus behind the venue and you're out in the middle of nowhere and you need to find a place to go to the bathroom. And there's no place because the venue's closed. You can't go on the bus. It sucks. I know that sounds horrible. Nobody likes to talk about it, but it's the truth. People kind of roll their eyes at that, but you try waking up every morning for 3 months looking for
a bathroom.
It's uncomfortable, but being able to provide, and we all made it our job ultimately. And as far as I was concerned, we were living the dream. Like, we were doing the thing that we all wanted to do. We were able to pay our rents and our mortgages. And I'm not saying we were able to come home and just live extravagantly and throw money around, but the culmination of all those years of being able to do it is the thing that I'm most proud of. It wasn't always glamorous. It wasn't always easy, but what great thing is easy, except for walking out and just being in the land? That's simple and easy. But to make a living doing anything is work. The thing that I'm most proud of is the fact that we were able to cultivate this fan base that was so loyal and so just loving and supportive of us for 20 years. And I still have a connection with a lot of those fans and those people that I met in Nebraska or Virginia or wherever it was, or Tokyo, and to be able to make those connections with people that would come back and we would recognize them, and they, like, as cheesy as it sounds, they become part of the family too. So maybe that's actually really what I just appreciate about the whole experience.
I remember back when I would tour with you guys that you were always experimenting with patterns and you were painting drum heads and whatnot. And I'd love for you to discuss your foray into art and when this love for painting manifested and the steps that you've taken to pivot your career path from music to art.
I was always a bit of a doodler, I always had like a little sketch pad or, a little black book that I would sketch or write or whatever. But I think with the writing process of the band and some of my personal relationships at various times with folks became disconnected. And it was something for me to calm my mind and be able to just express raw emotion sometimes, or just whatever thoughts were going on in my head. And that was, for me, that was going in the back of the bus and drawing, or like you said, just drawing a piece on the back of a green room or something, And I think that's just kind of where it started. It just progressed. It was like a snowball just snowballing down the hill, and it just kind of gained its own momentum. And I think at a certain point in the band, I really needed to be able to do my own thing and express it without the collective, without anyone else's. It was for me to be able to spit out what I needed to spit out at the time. And it evolved, and I think I just got more focused into it. When I first started making paintings, it was the first time I was able to like breathe at the end of it. Like I was able to really step back and just, it was a release.
It was like therapy for you.
It was. I was working through a lot of personal loss of friends and family, and never really hit it head on. And so for me, it was a way to release some of that stuff and to communicate with them in a way. So yeah, it really just was a release. And then I just was stubborn and just kept doing it. And I knew, at a certain point, I knew that the band wasn't going to last forever. And I knew that in order to prepare myself for that, I needed to not be Cory for Minus the Bear. I needed to be Cory Murchy.
Yeah.
And that way for me was, I found that through painting, because it didn't have anything to do with the band. It wasn't anything to do with it. I don't want to say painting saved my life, but it saved my head for sure, and it allowed me to feel like I could communicate with people on a personal level as opposed to a collective level.
Do you have any advice for second career artists on ways that they could kind of build a following for their work, hone their voice in the medium? I feel like I've really seen a progression in your work as it has evolved.
When I first started, I could not pull a straight line to save my life, like of paint. It was something that I really had to work at. I think the way I could get to the painting was because I had spent all those years doodling and drawing on drum heads and the back green rooms. And then it was like, oh, okay, let's put it on wood and use paint, and let's use some color. I've never used color. And that was, for me, that was a real big switch. I think is just using color as a way of, I called it coping with color as a coping mechanism. I don't even know what it was, but it was just, I needed to get it out. I needed it to be bright, just be like, this is me. Here it is. I'm figuring it out. It's a work in progress, but hopefully each piece will get better and change and evolve. I think it has, I can pull a straight line. I don't use tape. For me, it's faster to just try to get as straight of a line and just kind of figuring it out as I go. But yeah, so back to your question, you just have to put the hours in. It's the old, put 10,000 hours in and you become the person. Well, it takes more than that. You just have to continue doing it. It's a constant evolution. It's a constant process. It doesn't really stop. But yeah, I think you really just, if you want to make a painting, start making a painting. The first one is probably going to suck. You're not going to be stoked. Finish it, like get through to the end. And then if you feel like you've done something, put it out in the world, and then let the world do what they will with it. Yeah. And, 9 times out of 10, you'll be real surprised with the reaction you get. If you just put yourself out there, and if you're honest and true to whatever it is that you're doing, people pick that up, I feel, and they respond and react accordingly.
I just wanted to give an enormous thank you to all of the listeners who have made contributions towards the production of this podcast. Every season, I spend about 100 hours preparing, writing, editing, interviewing, sketching, distributing, and I have hard costs for my editor and hosting fees. It means so much to me that you find enough value and meaning in this work to pledge your support to keep it going. If you haven't had a chance to contribute, we've made it really easy. Just click the support button on the top of urbanexodus.com and pledge any amount that you like. Or join the Urban Exodus Patreon community. Thank you again. I feel so lucky to be a part of the amazing global community that this project has manifested. I think that there's this real strive for perfection in our society and like wanting to get it just right and like not wanting to show anything until you figured it out. Yeah. But sometimes that courage of sharing, it's just the same in a lot of ways as touring. It's like you see what resonates and then you're able to respond and fine tune and figure out what you need to do in order to get it where you need it to be or where you want it to be.
Yeah, it does take courage because it is scary to put yourself out there in any capacity. But that's really where I find in my life the most satisfying and the best feeling that I have and the most learning that I can do is when I put myself in situations where I'm scared to be there, you know, and that can be from deciding I'm going to throw my own art gallery or art show in a park in White Center with all of the paintings that I've made and just do it and not ask anyone if I can do it, just making it happen and doing it. So anything to deciding to pack up your house and move away, not knowing where you're going, what you're doing, just believe in the process and just do the thing. Like I know that it can sound flippant and oh, you know, just do the thing, but it's really what it comes down to. Be courageous. I've also said I'm just dumb enough to believe that I can accomplish what I've set out to do. You know, I'll fail a lot. That's fine. But I'm just dumb enough to get back on the horse and all right, let's give it another go.
You didn't end up going to college or art school. And I think that there are actually a lot of people now, young people who are really deciding whether it's worth it. I wondered if you had any advice for people who are feeling uncertain about whether or not they want to go to college. Any advice on ways to jump in and work towards building a career as a creative person?
Yeah, it's a tough one. I mean, I'm completely happy that I didn't go to college and, you know, don't feel like I missed out on any life experience or anything. For some people, it's exactly what they should do. If you want to pursue a career in the arts, it's the same as, you know, music. Decide what is it that you want out of it. Is it you're trying to just solely live off of it and make that your career? Or is it going to be your passion? And those two things don't necessarily have to match up. And that's okay. Like you don't have to, if you want to be just passionate and just make what you want and do however you want to do it, you may not be able to make a career out of it. But it might fill a void in your soul or heart, and it might still be your passion, but you still have to go to work and pay the bills in order to live. They can be two different things, and that's okay. Understand that if you're trying to make it a career, if it's music or art, there's a very real possibility and chance that you're going to have to do some compromising or, you know, do some work that you don't want to do. You might have to take some commissions that you really don't want to. If you're trying to pay your bills, that's what you got to do.
Also in our society, like this idea of success is often like, oh, they've made this into their career. But being a professional of something doesn't necessarily mean that it's valued more than someone that's doing it as a hobby. And I think we kind of have that a little bit skewed in our perception. So I think that that's really great advice.
Yeah. It would be great if we could all just make a living off our passion. Sometimes it's just not the reality too. There's real things that we have to take care of. And in order to take care of ourselves, in order to be able to make art.
We'll backtrack a little bit. You went to Colorado. You were working on this ranch. And the ranch really introduced you to irrigation, the movement of water, bringing life and beauty to places where it otherwise wouldn't be, especially in arid regions. And irrigation has kind of developed into this passion of yours. So I'd love for you to talk about it and anything that you found particularly frustrating or difficult and what you really love about irrigation, because that's actually what you do is your kind of full-time hustle in addition to doing your art.
I'll tell you this, it came out of nowhere. I was not expecting it whatsoever. It came to me because I was open. I allowed myself to be open to this weird new experience. Putting together an irrigation, a pipeline of gated pipe that spanned, what was it, like 40, 50 acres on one plot and like 70 acres on another. It was learning all this stuff. What I fell in love with was that I was doing this thing that it didn't have feelings. The water wasn't going to lie to me. The water was either flowing or it wasn't. It wasn't personal. Didn't have the baggage of working with 4 or 5 other people trying to create something. Being able to take water from a source and to apply it to a different area and to actually see the results of growth and what that meant for the land to actually put the water into it was revelatory to me. It came out of nowhere. I'm crying about water. It moved me in a way that it was this magical thing. It's crazy to actually think about it. None of us can live without water, right? We all eat different things. We all celebrate different ways. We all mourn different ways. We all have to drink water. It spans cultures, spans demographics, it spans everything. It's the great unifier, if you will. It's also, for me, I took it really serious. And there was a responsibility with using the water, especially in an arid landscape where there isn't endless amounts of water. I think the responsibility aspect was something that really I resonated with, because I was responsible for this thing that actually meant something. And then just seeing the process of watching that field grow and the animals coming and the deer and the elk coming and being a part of the process of the circle of life,
Yeah.
It was pretty life-changing. My wife joked that she has to ask me to do things 2 or 3 times. But the one thing that she never had to ask me to do was go down and open up the irrigation pipes. Like that was first thing in the morning. I was like, I'm out. I got to go switch the water. I was able to just be in my own space with it. I enjoyed the physical aspect. I enjoyed, being physical out under the sun and sweating my ass off and working with my hands and fixing things, figuring out how to do things. Yeah, it was just a confidence builder, I think. Before that, I didn't really do all that much, fixing of stuff around the house. But being put into this situation, it was like I had to figure it out. I couldn't call the plumber to irrigate my field. I needed to figure it out. And I had help. There was a Johnny, the guy that lived down the way, who also took care of part of the property. He was a great teacher and patient and, taught me some things too. It comes down to like getting to the situation, being like, well, you got to fix that. Don't know how to do it. We'll figure it out.
Yeah.
And that was very empowering.
You see the merits of your labor.
Yeah.
Immediately, almost.
Yeah.
And as somebody that works in water, I'd love to hear your perspective on the future of water access in the Western United States and any thoughts on ways to better conserve and preserve water for the future.
Yeah, it's definitely an issue, and it's going to be something that we're all going to be dealing with. I feel like I really, truly, believe that it's not just going to be a West or a Southwest issue. This is going to be a worldwide issue. And it already is in certain areas. There are water wars breaking out, conflicts over water security. It's a real thing. And I don't unfortunately seeing it get all that much better. When it comes to the Southwest and where we are, It's scary. The watering seasons are shorter. There's just less to go around for everybody. And the more people that move into town, the more wells are built. And, it starts taking, it's not even just surface water we're talking about. We're talking about the aquifers that are being slowly depleted, rapidly depleted. I don't know. I don't have any answers right now. It's going to be interesting. All I know is that we're going to try to do everything we can and we do try to do everything that we can to mitigate loss and, unnecessary spillage or, all that. But I've learned that it's not the small farmers that are taking all the water. It's the large corporations that are taking the water and using it. There's going to have to be something that happens though. I don't know. I don't know what is going to happen.
Since you grew up in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and you're living outside of Santa Fe now is it called Pena Blanca or?
Yeah, Pena Blanca. Yep.
Pena Blanca. I wondered if you've noticed the effects of climate change because you spent your youth there, and if you've seen any shifts or if things are getting warmer or more arid or.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the snowpacks just aren't the same. The snowfall, the rain, the monsoons haven't been hitting as much. During the summer months, we traditionally would have the monsoons that would kind of recharge the reservoirs and such. So yeah, there's definitely a lot of that changing. I mean, we've got fires breaking out kind of all around us now, and that's a little earlier than what it had previously been as far as fire season. Yeah, there's definitely change. Because I work with the acequia system, there's less water going into folks' farm lands, even just personal plots. And the government is actually trying to ask smaller farmers to let their fields just kind of go for a year or two. To me, it's crazy because it's like the small farmer isn't the one that's drawing the majority of the water. These are small farmers that are just eking out an existence to feed their family or feed their family and friends or whatever. New Mexico owes Texas at the moment. We're in deficit of what the water we owe to them from the Rio Grande, because Colorado, New Mexico, Texas, and Mexico all have water rights. They were drawn up during a banner rain year. It was like on record, it was the wettest year. There was more water that year than ever. And this is, I think this is like the turn of the century. It was, 100 years ago or whatever. Since then, the water has gone down, but all those treaties and water rights are still in effect. That it doesn't make sense to anybody because there's not that much water to go around. So those are going to have to be redrawn. And I think that's in the Colorado River. Folks that draw from that, I think they're in the process of rewriting some of the laws and statutes. So yeah, it's definitely happening. Just longer, drier seasons, and that just doesn't bode well for anything. But I will say, the Southwest is a hardy place, and it's a hardy people, and people have figured out ways to live here for thousands and thousands of years. There have been great droughts. There have been great, swings throughout history. Obviously, we're going down a path of just staying drier and hotter longer. So something we're going to have to figure out.
I'd love for you to describe your home, your landscape, the community that you found in Pena Blanca, and the challenges and benefits of living there.
So Pena Blanca is a little village right on the Rio Grande, just southwest of Santa Fe, about 30 miles. And we're situated between Cochiti Pueblo to our north and Santo Domingo, or Kiwa Pueblo to our south. Those are our neighbors. It's an old village that goes back, I want to say, beginning of the 1700s, like 1706, perhaps, is when it was like colonizers settled the area. And when my wife and I were looking for places to live in New Mexico, one of the things we did was look at a map, tried to figure out where the green parts were, because knowing the scarcity of water and the issues that we knew moving ahead, we wanted to make sure that there was at least water flowing, on a semi-regular basis. We ended up finding this beautiful little house in a little village of 600 or so. And it's right along the Rio, so it's very green. It's like one of the greenest spots from our yard to the northwest, and it's the Jemez Mountains, and Cochiti land actually butts up right next to us. Yeah, so it's a little farming community basically, and it's definitely changed, in the recent years, just because a lot of the farmland has been developed for houses and stuff like that. But I mean, it's still farmland for the most part.
You lived such kind of a transient life before, and now you're very rooted to a place, to a piece of land, to a kind of ritual. Have you seen changes in yourself, just mentally, physically, spiritually, from that transition?
I am very content and very happy just kind of being within my own space and the corridor that I travel to come to work. I'm not for want of needing to travel and be out and about all that much. That said, it's because I spent a lot of time doing that. I was very fortunate that I was able to travel and was able to do it in the way that we did. So I think I've just been able to really enjoy and be thankful for the place that we are and where we are now. I feel, much more connected to our community and our land in a way that I just never felt in Seattle. So yeah, it is spiritual. It is a connection with being here for sure.
We're living in a really polarized time right now. And I think that there's a lot of division, and you see a lot of that division easily on a small scale in small communities. And I wondered, as somebody that kind of moved into the community from away, even if you grew up in Santa Fe, how you made inroads with your neighbors and any advice that you had for new arrivals on ways to build bridges.
Yeah. Well, first off, the first thing I realized was down in the village of Pena Blanca was no one was really impressed that I grew up in Santa Fe. That wasn't like okay, cool. Yeah, great. You lived in Santa Fe. I think really it just took being able to just talk and wave and be friendly, and be okay with if people were not responsive sometimes. 90% of everybody is very friendly, and they've seen a lot of change, and a lot of folks come in to their communities potentially to disrupt but I think it's all based on intention and where your heart is. Smile, wave, be friendly, say hi. Like I said, 9 times out of 10 people wave and smile back. And I feel like, I don't know every neighbor in where we are, but I know a lot of them, and I feel more connected and like comfortable, where we are, just living with the people that we live with. Now there've been a lot of the traditional Hispanic families have moved out, and then a lot of Mexican immigrants have moved into a lot of the places. So it's kind of half old traditional Hispanic families and then half Mexican families that have recently moved up within the last 10, 15 years, let's say. And so that gets into a whole nother discussion about cultures in New Mexico, because it's quite the, as you know, melting pot. And It's not a big monolithic block of way people think or live. But like I said, that's a whole nother discussion. So much is made of the strife and the animosity between the different cultures, and between the Anglos and the Hispanics and the native, the Puebloans and then the Mexicans, but there's also a real sense of like everyone figuring it out and getting along. Like they've been doing it for a long time at this point. Yeah, there's some rubs here and there, but it's people figure it out and are actually like working together for the most part.
What do you appreciate the most about this next chapter that you and Annie are building together?
I appreciate that we allowed the process to take us to where we are right now. It was scary. We didn't know what was going on, but we were open, and we allowed ourselves to be open to new things and new experiences. And it allowed opportunities to come, just because, that's all I can say is that we were open to whatever was going to come next, and we were going to be able to roll with it and figure it out. I wasn't expecting to get this job here. I was not looking for a job whatsoever. I was making paintings at home. I had really gotten to a really fortunate and great spot where people were contacting me to get commissions, and I was making art, and that's what I was doing. It was my passion. It was my job. But I also realized really quick, wait a minute, now that I'm having to do this and kind of hustle and stay up on it, this is really turning into the thing that the band was turned into. Do I want that? Is being a full-time artist actually the thing that I wanted to do? Was it healthy for me? Was it the right thing for me to just stay at home making paintings and trying to hustle that, and to do it? I did it, but I was in the back of my head thinking, maybe this is really quickly turning into the work is fine, but it's like, am I able to really do the thing that I want to do?
It's the hustle that is required, and the compromise, and all of those things that you said.
Yeah.
And
it's
that
great.
can ruin it.
Exactly. And don't get me wrong, the opportunity to be able to make paintings for people, it's amazing. I'm amazed anytime someone reaches out and says, hey, I'd like a painting. I'm so thankful for that. And I want to do that, but do I want that to be what I'm focused on trying to make money in order to do, to stay afloat? And I didn't know that until this job came up. My sister actually works out here as well.
Oh,
so like
amazing.
all of the Murchy that are in New Mexico, we're all here at Las Golondrinas. It's pretty funny. The experience in Colorado with moving water was a profound one. I loved it. It was something that I really fell in love with. Couldn't explain why. It just was. We went over that. Moving down to New Mexico, down to Pena, I loved water still, but what was I going to actually do with that? Was I going to be able to find a job in a field to do irrigation? It wasn't really on the horizon for me. It didn't matter because I was making art, right? And then my sister sent me a message one day, and this is last March. Like I said, I'd built up a whole list of commissions that I had under my belt that I was making and doing. So that was great. I'd said that I was going to start selling paintings on the side of the road. And so I, pulled out my paintings and set up out there one day and just to do it. So I was doing that thing. And then my sister sent me a message and says, I don't know if you're looking for a job, but the ranch is looking for someone to move water. And I was just like, oh, I've got to check this out, because the place that I work at it's called El Rancho de las Golondrinas. It's an old ranch that has been around for hundreds of years. It's on the road that people would travel between Santa Fe to Mexico City. There was a big trade route for hundreds of years. And one of the places that they would stop is here in La Cienega at the ranch before they got to Santa Fe, or it was the first stop after they left Santa Fe. So a family bought this ranch in the 20s, and then they turned it into a living history museum in the 70s, the late mid 70s. And so the property has all these old, traditional homes. And so, yeah, I was given this opportunity to move water. I was just dumb enough to think, well, I could do that. I did it for a few months in Colorado. Why not? Ended up getting the job, hitting it off with my boss and with both my bosses, and they decided to give me a chance. And I think really what I had going for me, it wasn't a bunch of experience, but I was like, I'm ready to work. That brings me joy at the end of the day. So they took a chance on me. And so that's how I ended up here.
A lot of my listeners are living in cities right now. Any words of encouragement on steps that they can take to kind of prepare themselves to make a big transition in their life, make a big leap? Maybe that isn't even leaving the city, but maybe that's just like bringing more joy through their experiences or stepping outside of their comfort zone. What advice would you give them?
Yeah, I mean, if you want to do it, you just have to do it. I think stepping out of your comfort zone is the important way to put it too, because it won't be comfortable all the time. And you'll have to figure out that that's okay. Yeah, I guess. And when you move away from a city, don't expect the city things or thoughts, or you are coming into someone else's place and sphere, and you can come in guns blazing, or you can come, with an open hand and an open heart. And you aren't always going to agree about things, the same way as your neighbors, but it doesn't mean you can't work together. And it doesn't mean you can't get along. Like, I really, truly believe that. There is so much division right now, just, in the world, and the social medias plays a part to it. Be okay with being outside of your comfort zone, and being open to, others' way, I guess. You don't have to live that way. It doesn't mean you have to change how they're living, I guess, if that makes sense.
Cory, it's been such a pleasure to reconnect with you and to hear about this new life chapter that you have opened and have fully committed to. And it's wonderful to just see you thriving. How can people find your work online, see your art?
You can find my art on Instagram. That's primarily where I'm, posting art. I do have a website, cmurchy.com. And I am very much still making paintings. And that's not something that I'll stop doing. I'm looking forward to kind of wrapping up the handful of commissions that I'm working on. And I am really looking forward to seeing what's next when it comes to art, because I have different ideas of, moving forward in different ways as far as art goes. I'll probably play some music again pretty soon too. I am looking forward to stretching out again musically at some point. So
it's fun. I just started singing again after like a 12-year hiatus.
Yeah.
And I just forgot how much I enjoyed it and how much joy and peace it brings me. And I think I was so kind of set in the performance mode and all of that when I was younger, that as I've gotten older, I've realized just the thing that I actually really love about music is just playing music with other people. And well, thank you so much, Cory, for taking your Saturday morning to speak with me. I hope I get to see you guys sometime.
Yeah, come on out.
If you ever want to come to Maine, please.
That was one of the places that I would love to see more of. I think we played Portland maybe twice in our career. As you know, it's, not small on the path of most touring bands, but yeah, I always just loved it up there. So definitely.
Thank you again, Cory, for joining us on the show. Some of my key takeaways from this episode. First, you don't have to turn your passion into your profession in order to be considered a success. Sometimes turning something you love into a job can take the joy out of it. Ask yourself if you are committed enough to your passion to endure the less appealing parts of making it support you. If you aren't willing to compromise or change course to appeal to your customers or the changing market, then you might be happier keeping that passion as a side hustle. Another takeaway is that finding your own creative outlet can be incredibly rewarding and therapeutic. Don't worry if you create a bunch of ugly or weird stuff at first. Skill and style can only be developed over time. Be kind to yourself and trust that the process will lead you somewhere greater than where you started. Also, water is magic. It is the lifeblood that runs through all living creatures on Earth. We need to understand and respect how vital this resource is and do everything in our power to keep it clean, accessible, and flowing for future generations. And just a little personal takeaway, stay connected with your friends through the different phases of your lives. It was so wonderful to have an opportunity to reconnect with Cory for this podcast, but I could have easily reached out to him earlier. In this age of social media, it sometimes feels like you are still connected to people because you are watching their curated feeds from afar. But that will never compare with the real connection and real conversation. If there is someone that you've lost touch with over the years, find some time this week to give them a call and see how they're doing. You might be surprised at how good it makes you feel. friends, thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of the Urban Exodus podcast. This project is made possible by listener support. I do this work because the people I meet through this project give me hope for the future, and I think we could all use a little more motivation and inspiration in this current moment in history. All of the work that I do through this project is to encourage people to believe in themselves and to work towards a better future for their community and for our planet. Your continued support will keep this passion project running. The easiest way to contribute is to click the support button on the top of urbanexodus.com and pledge any amount that you like. Or you can buy an ad spot in an upcoming episode, shop our online store of rurally made goods, or join our Patreon community for access to bonus features, rapid-fire interviews with podcast guests, videos, live presentations, and so much more. Visit patreon.com/urbanexodus. Another way to support is by giving us a 5-star rating on iTunes and recommending Urban Exodus to your friends. Thank you again for helping me continue to do this work. I couldn't do this without all of you. You can find Urban Exodus on Instagram and Facebook at The Urban Exodus. To read more in-depth features on folks who ditched the city and went country, visit urbanexodus.com. Until next time, I'm Alyssa Hessler, and this is The Urban Exodus.